On a dry Tuesday in March of 2019, Delamay Hutchins presented a validated check for $5,000 and affixed her signature to a tract of land in Garfield County, Oklahoma, that no one desired. The Cresswell siblings, Harlan and Boyd, clasped her hand and departed without a backward glance. Why would they? They had just divested themselves of 200 acres of parched, sun-baked soil that had yielded no useful harvest in 11 years. They sold it to a 61-year-old widow who drove a 10-year-old truck and possessed a reputation, as the locals observed, for being too resolute to concede defeat. The surrounding community engaged in hushed discussions. The local feed store speculated. The county tax assessor had already appraised the property at less than the cost of the deed registration. Not a solitary soul in the county believed Delamay had made a sensible choice. And somewhere beneath that arid, alkaline earth, below the dilapidated irrigation channels and the cracked clay that swallowed seeds whole, lay an underground reservoir of water so immense that independent geologists would eventually place its worth at $40 million. No one knew, neither the vendors, nor the financial institutions, nor the neighbors. No one, that is, until Delamay. If tales of ordinary individuals perceiving what others overlook resonate with you, please subscribe and join our community. We deliver authentic rural narratives imbued with profound life lessons. Share your viewing location in the comments below. We delight in learning the reach of these stories. Now, let us unveil precisely how a forgotten farm irrevocably altered one woman's existence. Delamay Hutchins was not prone to romanticism. She did not discourse on land in the effusive manner seen in cinematic productions. Her discourse centered on soil pH, subsoil moisture, root depth, and wind erosion. Her hands bore the marks of someone who had been engaged in agriculture since the age of 14 in Enid, Oklahoma, and she possessed the patience of an individual who had witnessed enough crop failures to cultivate a profound aversion to romanticizing any single growing season. She was 61 when she signed that check. Standing at 5 feet 4 inches, she had a habit of inspecting her fields before dawn and maintained a journal that more closely resembled a hydrological field log than a personal diary. It chronicled rainfall measurements, moisture readings, and notations on the formation and duration of puddles before the soil reabsorbed them. She was not without her flaws. She could be challenging. She frequently debated with county agricultural extension agents when their counsel diverged from her own convictions. She harbored a distrust of government crop insurance programs and did not always solicit assistance when it was needed. Her daughter remarked that she was the most independent person on the planet, though not always with positive intent. However, Delamay grasped the essence of land much as some individuals comprehend music, not through theoretical study, but through years of attentive listening. 3 years prior to her acquisition of the Cresswell property, Delamay had lost nearly everything she had meticulously built over 3 decades. Her husband, Roy Hutchins, succumbed to a heart attack in the summer of 2016, a condition he had been postponing with sheer stubbornness for the better part of a decade. He left behind a 400-acre wheat farm, a devoted border collie named Pepper, and a collection of outstanding operational debts that Delamay had not fully comprehended. Roy was a man of pride. He had not wished to burden her. By 2018, the bank had repossessed 360 acres of the original estate. She retained the 40-acre homestead parcel and an unyielding resolve that surprised even her closest confidants. She was not contemplating abandoning farming. This notion was entirely beyond her consideration. Roy's family had cultivated the soil of Garfield County for 3 generations, and she had willingly joined that legacy. She refused to permit it to perish due to figures on a balance sheet. She required additional acreage, affordable acreage to render the enterprise viable once more, which is precisely how the Cresswell brothers came to her attention. Harlan and Boyd Cresswell were not malevolent individuals. They were simply men who had so efficiently transformed land into a mere spreadsheet that they had neglected to consider that land could embody something more. They had inherited 1,800 acres from their father in the mid-1990s and had spent 20 years systematically selling off parcels that were not proving profitable. They excelled at identifying a plot's productive potential and were equally adept at discarding what they deemed incapable of yielding results. They quantified land in terms of yield per acre, assessed value, and drainage grades. They believed themselves to be infallible. The 200-acre parcel situated at the eastern periphery of their holdings had produced nothing for 11 years. The soil registered high levels of sodium carbonate. A previous tenant had abandoned it after 3 seasons of crop failure. The irrigation system had deteriorated beyond repair. Even the indigenous vegetation struggled to thrive. They priced it at $5,000, not out of magnanimity, but because, according to their calculations, it was worth more than that. Upon Delamay's expression of interest, Boyd reportedly remarked to his brother, "Let her have it. At least someone will cease inquiring about it from us." Their understanding of value was limited to the observable. That was their fundamental error. The land was, by every visible metric, depleted. Its surface bore the indelible mark of decades of sodium accumulation, a phenomenon farmers refer to as white alkali, a pallid, crusty deposit signaling ground so chemically imbalanced that rainwater simply beaded and flowed away rather than penetrating. Where normal soil readily absorbs moisture, this surface actively repelled it. Where healthy clay retains water within its subsoil strata, this ground hardened into an impermeable pan just 18 inches below the surface. The antiquated irrigation channels were choked with silt and fractured beyond utility. The solitary pond had diminished to a muddy basin encircled by salt stains. The fencing was corroded through. The entire eastern boundary carried a faint scent of dry minerals on warm afternoons. Delamay's neighbor, Curtis Fales, a man who had farmed the adjacent land for 40 years, informed her directly the week after she signed, "Della, I truly don't comprehend your thinking. That ground won't sustain even a cactus." She inclined her head politely. She offered her thanks. The subsequent morning, at 5 o'clock, she traversed the property alone, accompanied by her journal and a soil probe she kept stored behind the driver's seat of her truck. And it was then that she observed something out of place. In the northeastern quadrant of the property, the lowest elevation, where the terrain gently sloped towards an ancient, unnamed creek bed, the ground behaved differently. Not conspicuously so, not in a manner that would draw attention from a casual glance, but demonstrably differently. The surface cracking that characterized every other section of the property was absent in that particular corner. The soil there possessed a subtly darker hue, and despite 2 months without significant rainfall, a slender line of volunteer grass, the kind that necessitates consistent subsurface moisture, traced the length of the old creek channel like a verdant thread woven into pale fabric. Delamay knelt and pressed her fingers into the soil. Then, she retrieved her hand probe and pushed it 18 inches deep into the earth. The probe emerged moist, not from the preceding month's rain. Moist in the manner that soil behaves when something beneath it is continuously nourishing it from below. She divulged nothing to anyone for 3 weeks. She visited that corner every morning before sunrise and meticulously recorded every measurement. A question began to form in her mind, one she was not yet prepared to articulate aloud. In April of 2019, she contacted Dr. Raymond Good, a hydrologist from Oklahoma State University, whom she had encountered at an agricultural extension conference several years prior. She read him her recorded measurements over the telephone. A protracted silence ensued on the line. "Della," he stated, "I believe you ought to allow me to investigate that." What Della May had inadvertently discovered, and what Dr. Good would dedicate 6 months to confirming, was an aquifer recharge zone. Aquifers are subterranean strata of permeable rock, sediment, or gravel that store and gradually release groundwater. They do not alter the hue of the sky above them. What they occasionally do in low-lying regions where the underlying geology is conducive is propel moisture upward through capillary action, maintaining the overlying soil consistently and persistently damp. The alkaline composition at the surface of the Cresswell land had, in fact, effectively concealed the aquifer's existence. The sodium-rich topsoil was not merely a consequence of drought, it was the chemical fingerprint of mineral-laden groundwater that had been ascending slowly for decades, evaporating near the surface and depositing its saline residues. The white alkali, which everyone had identified as the primary problem, was, in reality, evidence of the solution situated directly beneath. The prior proprietors had observed cracked, saline soil and concluded that the land was irrevocably ruined. They never once considered investigating its subterranean depths. By early 2020, Dr. Good's findings had been substantiated by 2 independent geological survey firms. The aquifer beneath Della May's 200 acres was interconnected with a significantly larger subterranean formation, one possessing the capacity to sustain extensive agricultural or municipal water supplies for decades. In a region now experiencing its 5th consecutive year of below-average rainfall, what lay beneath her land was not merely water. It represented leverage. It signified security. It amounted to, according to professional assessments, approximately $40 million in water rights. Word inevitably spread. It always does in a county of that size. Within 30 days, Della May had received inquiries from 3 water development corporations, 1 municipal utility authority, and, most notably, a legal firm representing Harlan and Boyd Creswell, who had suddenly developed an intense interest in the precise wording of the 2019 sale agreement. Boyd suggested that the aquifer likely extended beyond her property boundaries, implying a shared claim. Harlan retained his own geologist. The county observed more surveyors in 2 months than it had in the preceding decade. Della May contacted her attorney, a water rights specialist based in Oklahoma City named Joanna Pruitt, and simply stated, "I require you to review a contract for me." The contract was unequivocal. The transaction had been legitimate, finalized, and meticulously documented. In Oklahoma, landowners possess statutory rights to the groundwater located beneath their property. The Cresswells held no claim. Della May did not act impulsively. This was, perhaps, the most telling aspect of all that followed. She received offers. She consulted with experts. She took her time, a luxury most individuals in her predicament would have felt too anxious to afford. Ultimately, she negotiated a long-term water access accord with a regional agricultural water authority, a pact carefully structured to preserve the aquifer's recharge rate, limit extraction to sustainable levels, and provide her with revenue for the duration of the agreement. She utilized a portion of the initial proceeds to commence the restoration of the surface farmland, treating the alkaline soil with agricultural gypsum to rectify sodium levels, gradually rebuilding the irrigation infrastructure, and planting drought-tolerant cover crops to stabilize the ground above the aquifer and safeguard its integrity. By the autumn of 2021, greenery was reappearing on land that had not produced anything of consequence in over a decade. Curtis Fales paid a visit one afternoon and stood at the field's edge, silently observing the transformation. Finally, he inquired, "How did you ascertain that?" Della May considered his question for a moment. "I didn't," she responded. "I simply did not decide it was worthless before I investigated." There exists a peculiar form of arrogance that accompanies the knowledge of the price of everything. The Creswells were not unkind individuals. They were simply men who had trained themselves to evaluate land based on its surface output and ceased inquiring about what it might be concealing beneath. Delamay possessed a different inclination. She posed questions. She meticulously recorded observations. She maintained patience in the face of challenges that would have deterred others. The water had always been present. It had been accumulating beneath that fractured earth for longer than any resident of Garfield County had been alive. It did not require discovery to exist. It simply necessitated an individual willing to kneel in the dirt and perceive that something was not adding up. As Masanobu Fukuoka wisely stated, the ultimate aim of farming is not the cultivation of crops, but the cultivation and perfection of human beings. Delamay did not set out to discover $40 million. She set out to find something worthy of cultivation. And in doing so, she realized that those two objectives had been one and the same all along.